Welcome back. So we check in today with someone new contributor here on the show, but a name that you may know, you may have heard over the years, Dimitri Soudas, who is a former director of communications for Stephen Harper and now political commentator. Dimitri, nice to have you here.
Nice to be on your show, Aaron, and it's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Let me mention, by the way, that our feature is brought to you by Guaranteed Industries, reminding you that, you know what, when you've been in business for 75 years, taking care of Montrealers' heating and cooling needs, they're folks you can trust. Guaranteed Industries, 514-342-3400. They are a Lennox Premier dealer. So we spent some time yesterday, Dimitri, talking about Jagmeet Singh. We're going to hear more from him coming up a little after 5:30 today because he held a press conference, took questions. I will tell you my reaction to hearing most of the Q&A today, which was much ado about nothing. I didn't get a whole lot out of here at all. What about you?
Well, I think Mr. Singh came to a point where he saw no more political benefit to being attached to Justin Trudeau, who currently leads a government that is historically unpopular, and he had to rip off the Band-Aid. And the timing that he chose to rip off the Band-Aid, first of all, it caught the Liberals completely off guard. The Prime Minister didn't know, his cabinet didn't know. They basically learned about it a few minutes before that video yesterday was aired live. The timing is very interesting, and I'll tell you why. In just 1 week, or a little bit over 1 week, there are two critical by-elections happening. One in Montreal, La Salle-et-Verdun, and another one in Manitoba. And the Manitoba riding is critically important for Mr. Singh. Why? Well, because the NDP has held that riding since 1979. Not even Jean Chrétien was able to win that riding, Elmwood-Transcona. The only time the NDP lost that riding was in 2011 to Stephen Harper. And then you have the by-election, which I'm not surprised to see that Mr. Singh is chatting with you later today because there's a by-election in Montreal. And that is a must for him to win. Why? Well, because he laid down the chips today. He laid down the chips and he basically said, I am the only one that can beat Pierre Poilievre. He is placing himself ahead of the Prime Minister, basically saying, I am the alternative. And how can he be the alternative if he keeps propping up the current Liberal government? He's going to have a hard time if doubling down of the chips that he did today, number one, he literally doesn't win both of these by-elections, a current NDP riding and a riding that the NDP won under Jack Layton in 2011, La Salle-et-Verdun. And number two, the bigger test is since he's now accused Justin Trudeau out of nowhere after propping him up for 2 years, Justin Trudeau is on the side of the rich, the wealthy, the big corporations. Well, the first opportunity that he gets is when the House of Commons comes back, and there'll be a non-confidence motion, no doubt, tabled by the Conservatives. And the question is Mr. Singh going to walk the walk?
All right, so let's be honest here. That's going to come up. I think everyone senses that's going to happen. Your take, that comes up. It's brought up by by Pierre Poilievre. What does Jagmeet Singh do?
So it all depends on what Mr. Poilievre ultimately aims to achieve. If the motion is nice and simple, which is basically that this House has lost confidence in the government, it's going to be very hard for Mr. Singh to justify why he's voting against it. Now, if Mr. Poilievre decides to attach a proviso to it, like, for example, that this House has lost confidence in the government and we have a carbon tax election, well, then Mr. Singh is going to walk it back. But again, he's going to be accused by the Conservatives of backing the Liberal government because he had the first opportunity to walk the walk on the motion of non-confidence. What is even more interesting is the Bloc Québécois. The Bloc Québécois is now back on the political spectrum. Over the last 2 years, they've kind of almost disappeared because of the certainty that the government would not fall. So the Bloc reappears now, and here's what I'll tell you today, Aaron. If there's one party to watch on the upcoming by-election who can potentially win La Salle-et-Verdun for the first time ever, it's the Bloc Québécois.
Okay, well, all right, so let's play that out, Dimitri. They win, the Bloc wins La Salle-et-Verdun. It's another loss for the Liberals after St. Paul in Toronto. Then what? What happens? Is Justin Trudeau then forced to walk the walk himself?
You know, that's the question on everybody's mind, including his own cabinet ministers. Today, another plank fell on the Prime Minister's head. His national campaign director quit.
Right.
The person in charge of planning the next election. So the Liberals are meeting for the first time. Mr. Trudeau, for the first time since the defeat in Toronto, in St. Paul's, another riding that they've held literally since Confederation, except for when Mr. Mulroney was Prime Minister. He's going to be very hard-pressed on whether or not he actually is the right person to lead the Liberals in next election. Having said that, maybe the thinking is take it all the way to the end, wear the responsibility of the electoral defeat if they lose, because again, a week in politics is an eternity and elections matter, and then start with a clean slate. But ultimately, his caucus, nervous Nellies is what Jean Chrétien used to call them. What I suspect will happen is if Mr. Trudeau decides to hang on, you will see a plethora of members of parliament and current ministers that will simply say, we're not running again.
Which is enough to then force the prime minister to what? Consider taking that walk in the snow like his dad did, or do what?
I think he's dug himself in and that he genuinely wants to take this to the finish line. Okay. Unless somebody stands up and says, somebody with credibility who says, time for you to genuinely go. And so far, we've seen a lot of the background, the off the record, a few former senators here or there. But generally speaking, his cabinet and the heavyweights in his caucus have not expressed publicly what they say privately.
All right, let me move on from that and talk about the other big story politically, this time provincially, not federally, and that's Pierre Fitzgibbon, our super minister, choosing to walk away just the other day. A lot of people trying to understand, first of all, two things. Number one, he wanted it on his own schedule, which would have allowed him to leave in December. But when he told that to François Legault, the premier decided, no, this will be done on my schedule. You leave now. What did you think of that?
Well, ultimately, it is the premier's prerogative. Having said that, I don't understand why he exercised that prerogative. Minister Fitzgibbon was probably one of the most competent, most effective, most disciplined ministers, despite all the colorfulness that he brings. He had a very clear idea on the issue of the electric battery plant, Northvolt, on the agenda of the government to build new dams, the expansion of Hydro-Quebec, and so on and so forth. So, I'm going to say if I was François Legault, I would have said, Pierre, we've known each other since the 1970s. We went to university together. I need you to stay on a little bit longer. Maybe you're not going to stay until the end of your term, but can you see this through to the end? And maybe in October, go out for dinner with him and say, because Minister Fitzgibbon had basically communicated to Premier Legault that come December, right before Christmas, I'm gone. I'm hanging up my shoes. So October, just say, can I get a few more months? New minister coming in, Minister Fréchette. She is inheriting both of those portfolios. But I think strategically, the premier could have acted less selfishly, i.e., convinced his old friend to stay on just a little bit longer.
Let me ask a dumb question here. So I saw yesterday in the Pierre
No
Fitzgibbon...
dumb questions, only dumb answers.
Wait to hear it first. So Pierre Fitzgibbon yesterday, in handing in his resignation, if you will, to François Legault, says, I've learned a lot, and he's of course he's been a businessman for many, many years. He said he's leaving the economy in great shape, and I read that and I thought, leaving the economy in great shape? We're running an $11 billion deficit. How is that possible?
Well, have you ever heard a politician say, I'm leaving now and things are worse off today than
true.
What they were? So I think the spin on behalf of Minister Fitzgibbon, what he's really saying is maybe the finance minister is running record deficits, maybe spending is slightly out of control. It's not what we promised. But as far as economic development, the portfolio that I held, I brought in historic investments into Quebec. The path forward seems to be laid in terms of building a more prosperous Quebec. But again, to go back to the initial point, please tell me the last time that a politician leaving said, I tried, but things are worse off today than what they were when I first started.
Yeah, I'm sorry I did a terrible job. I have to go. Okay. Let me ask you one other thing with respect to Pierre Fitzgibbon. His plans versus what apparently Premier Legault's plans are. We all know now famously, of course, about that announcement by Fitzgibbon before he left, saying that, we're going to be spending an awful lot of money building up the infrastructure for Hydro-Quebec. It's going to mean that rates are going to go up. Some people speculating 5-10%. And as soon as he said that, of course, the premier felt the need to tweet out, no, as long as I'm premier, we'll be restricted, we'll be limited. It will never be higher than 3%, right? So that being the case, and this giant energy bill, and I hear people describe this as a massive energy bill, this bill that Pierre Fitzgibbon crafted, he's not going to be here to defend it now, no matter who you give the portfolio to. Is that reason for concern for the premier?
Yes and no. And on the actual statement that rates will have to rise, let's again not forget the context in which we find ourselves in Quebec. And as you know, I was born and raised in Montreal, so I paid electricity bills in Quebec and I paid electricity bills in Ontario, which is where I live now. Quebecers, on average, pay significantly less than anybody else in energy bills in all of North America. So what former Minister Fitzgibbon said resonates with more truthfulness as it relates to eventually we're going to have this conversation. And what Premier Legault is saying is purely political, so long as I am Premier. Because imagine if a Premier came out and said, I'm going to raise your electricity bill not by 3%, but by 5 or 6%. Mm-hmm. That wouldn't bowl over very well politically. Right. So between now and 2026, you're going to see the political position of every single party to say, no, we are absolutely not going to raise your electricity bills by more than 3%. What happens down the road, because once you invest in this new infrastructure, once you expand your grid, once you expand your capacity, ultimately somebody's got to pay the bill. And the Premier did a press conference today and says, well, we're going to pass on the bill to businesses and we're going to pass on the bill to big industrial projects. Time will tell on whether or not what Minister Fitzgibbon today said it's a prophecy, or in the future what any government would do.
Last thing I will ask, I know we didn't talk about this. I'd be curious for you to weigh in. So Denis Coderre, the first really to declare he was interested in the leadership of the provincial Liberals. Find out in the last week or so, he's in trouble with the tax man, not once, but 2 different times. We found out he owes money to Rev Quebec. And the message from the Liberal leadership here provincially is, listen, you can't even consider running if you don't clear up your personal mess first. What do you make of that? Is he done?
Well, never count somebody like Denis Coderre out. Because he doesn't give up, and sometimes to his own detriment. So clearly he has back owing taxes to Revenue Quebec. If he wants to lead the Liberal Party, if he wants to aspire to being the Premier of Quebec, this needs to be cleared up, i.e. this debt needs to be paid off before he officially deposits his candidacy with the Quebec Liberal Party. Having said that, just some context. The last 7 years have not been the best years for Denis Coderre. He was the incumbent mayor of Montreal. He lost. He ran again. He lost again. He went through a divorce, based on what I read in the news, a nasty one. And not that divorces are ever not nasty. He had health problems, serious health problems. So I think what he needs to do is, by the end of this year, by the end of December, now that his divorce seems to have been settled, is pay up so that ultimately he has a clean slate. And what impact will this have on Liberal voters or voters who used to be Liberal and want to come back to the party? I think minimal. But when you aspire to be leader of a province or of any party, you cannot have these kind of things hanging behind you.
All right. Dimitri, very much appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.